What's up, man?
You know, just another day in paradise over here.
Another
Spitting
day
the
in
old wire.
paradise. Yeah, yeah. Well, been busy doing some stuff.
Yeah, you got a
I
bunch of side quests right now on top of an epic workload.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I did a little side quest, and it's funny. I can give you kind of I realize it makes zero sense to you, and anybody watching the show who's not a programmer will
I was like,
probably not.
yay, a repo.
Even some programmers may be like, I
Like,
don't get what
cool.
the purpose of this is. I
Give me a
personally,
landing page, man. Give me a one-sheeter.
I also don't know the purpose of this yet, but I think that's the
It's
point
fine.
of
It's
side
kind of
quests, right?
fine.
I'm
Yeah,
on a side quest.
that's right.
I'll give you how it came about, and you'll have to flag Carlo Caleco because he'll know
Cool.
exactly what this is. So six years ago, at the Not Worldwide, and Brian and McDonald and Carlo and I came up with this concept. It was actually Carlo's inspiration. He was calling it the remote view model, and I'll tell you what the problem was that it set out to solve. At the Knot, we had a web interface. We had a Swift interface, or some of it was in Objective-C at the time too, and that was for the iOS app. And then you also had an Android app that was written in Kotlin. So you had these three apps. All every time we released something to the web app. So let's say we fixed your wedding to-do list, right? It also had to be developed in Swift, and it also had to be developed in Kotlin. Now, people watching this now go, should have just did them all in React Native. Well, not so easy when you've got decades of apps, build up, and you have a whole bunch of teams that are super against it. And remember, this is pre-LLM, so people who were into writing Swift were into writing Swift, and there was a lot of politics around it. And also, I don't think React Native
I was
was
gonna
at
say
that.
build prior to.
Well, React Native was around, but it wasn't as good, and there was a lot of debate about that. But we came up with this idea that we think sort of would please everybody, and we called it the remote view model. And what was the remote view model? The remote view model was the idea that we could issue a view model as JSON. So if you think of an API, how the web works, let me start over all the way, give a quick primer, right? An API endpoint, I put in a URL into an API. Sometimes you get a web page that's HTML. It serves you back HTML. It's great if everything could render HTML, right? So if I could serve that would be like a web view, what we would call in an app in a web view. It's just like a virtual browser. So API endpoints can serve HTML, they can serve JSON, they can serve text documents, right? JSON is what you get when you just serve data. And if you notice, if you've ever seen with LLMs, sometimes people will put in a prompt and they're like, make sure you return JSON that looks like this, because we're trying to get the content back in a structured form that a programming language could read and access the pieces, right? If you just get like a blob of text, how is my program supposed to interpret that, right? You as a human read the text. That's great for you, the computer to human communication. But for computer to computer communication, I either need an LLM to output HTML, or in most cases, we're looking for JSON. And then we take that data and if I take an image and I say, hey, I want you to take this image and extract first name, last name, address, like an image of a license. What I want the LLM to return is not text that says the first name is Mike, the last name is Mike is Rispoli, he lives at. No, I want you to return me like curly brace, name, Mike, last name,
Structured
right?
data.
I need to be able to take that and put it into a program. So if you think about it, it was actually the same problem then, in that React, right? We would write React that would fetch JSON from our APIs and it would turn it into UI. And Swift would fetch that same JSON and turn it into UI, but that was written in Swift, not React, not JavaScript, HTML, right? And the same thing for Kotlin. So your APIs serve JSON. And what we said was, okay, we have a design system. At the time, it was called Union. I don't know if that's still we had a design system, design tokens, kind of why I wanted Donnie to be here, because this would have been cool. And it was all called the same stuff. We were like, this is how you do a list. This was the list component in React. This was the, slideshow component.
Right.
And there was a slideshow, and the UI team built it in all three languages. So we were like, okay, let's serve JSON that says hero. Image is this is and each would parse that JSON into the hero based on the design system. And so nobody was going rogue anymore either. Every single thing that we were going to put into all three UIs had to first be a component that was built in React, in Swift, and in Kotlin. And those three things, it was this unified language, and we would serve this JSON back and render it. And it actually worked pretty good. I had like a React renderer that turned this JSON into the components, passed the data into those components, made the child components. They did the same thing with Swift, and they did the same thing with Kotlin. And so at a point, it was really cool because we had a data structure that we called the remote. Now do you get the idea behind the view model?
Sure.
Normally, you would say the model is just the raw data. We called this the view model because we bridged the model with the view, which is the thing you see. And all of these things we're doing was acting as renderers. And there was a little bit of trickiness around, like, let's say there was behavior. They all round trip to the same server. So we did end up creating more unified behavior, commands, so to speak. So when you clicked on a thing, they all did the same thing, even though the actual implementation details of how the UI would re-render could be different. And so we did this at the time, and I don't know if it's still being used. There was trickiness around debugging it, I want to say, but it was an interesting way to say these all are now consistent, because we would be guaranteed that when the view model was tested, as soon as we released it, you'd push the view model into the renderer, and it would build the whole thing, and it was all in everybody's native code. And so really all we were doing was maintaining these UI kits or any new components that needed to be built as a result of that, and coming up with this unified interface. It was a cool idea. Never really went much further because that problem basically React Native is the thing people are using a little bit more and more now. I don't know if that problem has reared its head, but it seems like more people are moving towards like a React Native or a capacitor, kind of rendering for the web first and then finding ways to do this. I never really revisited it. Anyway, let's go a little bit further down the line. That JSON structure Vercel released something like this, I want to say 3 months ago, and I immediately messaged Carlo on LinkedIn, and I said, dude, this is the remote view model. Like, this is the same thing. But their use case for it was like an object that said it was like the tag name that was supposed to render, any attributes on it. So it was like an H2, any attributes, and then the children. It was basically a set of objects, a JSON structure that rendered into UI for the purposes of an LLM being able to produce UI on the fly, which was the subject of our talk last week, which was around Google Disco, and this idea that you could have LLMs authoring programs on the fly in real time around the thing. So it could take the data, produce these views. And now you may be asking, what's the difference between that and like a replit? Now, a replit or a V0 is actually producing an entire code base that you have to run on a server. The idea behind this is really it could be deployed on the fly. That's really the magic of it, is actually, no, the node server and everything you need is already running. It's just producing these views on the fly.
But what about retaining it? Like, that's what I like about the V0 or replit use case or whatever. Like, I can retain it, I can return to that project, and I can pick up where I left off, just to simplify it. With yours, like, can I pick up where I left off? Simply.
So these are
the
all
Disco project really kind of wasn't. That was like in my session, I can like render the view I want. If I leave and the cookie clears, I start over.
So you could, because JSON can be stored in a database. So it's kind of gets interesting.
Right.
If you start to think about, I like this view that you built, save it. And instead of it being saved as a file, like right now, V0 is producing files on a machine that are being saved, like a TypeScript file or a JavaScript file. I could actually just save this as a JSON column in like a Postgres database, assuming it's not giant, and then call it back again and be like, hey, I have this, bring that back. So you could, there are ways that you could cache it. You could even save it as a file on like an S3 bucket and call it back in again. I haven't gotten that far yet. But these are all things you're going where I'm thinking of, which is, how do I save things that are genuinely useful? Like, from a compute perspective, it doesn't make sense for the user to ask for the same piece of UI over and over again and have the LLM reproduce the same thing over and over again. Not only that, the LLM won't reproduce the same thing over and over again. It'll give you like a different variation every time. So it does make some sense to have pre-filled components, preset ways to do things, but it doesn't change the fact that you may want to combine this idea similar to what we did. We had preset components. We didn't write like H1P, like we didn't let it just go willy-nilly. We had preset components that we mapped to each style. But this is where it gets hazy for me, because I said, well, that's interesting. What if the LLM could render this JSON? But that could be a web application. It could be parsed by Go. It could be parsed by Clojure. It could be parsed by, if I had a spec, a language that was JSON, it could be Rust, right? I could basically write programs that get parsed. And when we think about this, you say, well, some of you may already know where I'm going with this, is the Lisp style programming languages, which are like Clojure and Common Lisp and Scheme. You actually write in what's in like the AST form, the abstract syntax tree form. You're writing basically data structures that can execute as programs. If you're a layperson, this is kind of hard to explain. It's not necessary to understand that part, but I've always been kind of fascinated with this idea of how Lisp, so if you have a regular programming language, you guys have all now seen JavaScript code. When that gets parsed, they turn that into a tree structure that can be traversed. Lisp programmers kind of write in that tree, if that makes sense. They write a level below that, but it enables, for people who really love it, it enables a lot of really cool things to write at that level. And so going from the object form that we had at the knot, that Vercel released the same type of form with keys and objects, I thought, I don't want it to do that, because one of the things with LLMs is you need token efficiency. Lisps are incredibly token efficient. If I could take that and create a Lisp that's serialized as JSON, I could both be token efficient and write complete programs in this style. Alas, JSON Lisp is born. Look, I had always had this, and it was like a silly little side thing, like a little silly side quest that I had years that I was hand kind of doing. But now that I have the advantage of LLMs, I thought maybe I should just like let it help and finish and see in its totality what it could be, what might be. And so I release it to you all. I have some ideas for what I want to do with it. And there's been a couple of little things that have come up over the years with us that I thought, oh, that could be kind of cool for this use case. LLM to code on the fly. Going back to that Google Disco demo we did, I feel like this can be the foundation of that. Because now you're not asking the LLM to act as a coding agent and write, and like you need an agent plus the harness that can write files and do all these things that V0 is doing, and then actually be rendering it. And if you picture Google Disco, you could almost picture an agent on the left, UI rendering on the right, but there's all these files, all this machinery going on in the back end. How could we kind of slim that down and say it's just going to output JSON that turns into UI, like from JSON to UI? And so that's what JSON Lisp is. I've open sourced it. You want to take a look at it?
Yeah, I mean, can't do much with it on my own.
You can't do, yeah. I mean, I'll just share my screen really quick, and we could I'll take a look at it. Where are we? So, cause of a kind, JSON Lisp. This is it. It is a no-build browser native JSON UI runtime for rendering safe dynamic interfaces. But as I had already said, I broke it down into different pieces. There's a DOM package that's specifically for doing web. There's web components so that you could build web components. There's a core. And the idea generally is these pieces, parser, evaluator, the state helpers, that we could build in different languages. So you could build a parser for Go. You could build one for Rust. You could do these things on the fly. And you can kind of see a little bit of the structure. HTML, right? This renders a button with a click handler at click that's going to set the state. It's going to set some state called count. and it's going to use the Lisp syntax. It's going to add 1 to it. Let me show you the let me just show you the demo, right? Here's your JSON. This data could be saved to a database. It's completely serializable. And this is your incrementer, and you can see the state. So it's a way to have versioned, have some state. It has your view. If you've ever written Elm, a lot of this is very based on the Elm architecture, with the exception of course, that this is mutating state directly. Let me show you the other example, the form example, where we actually have a bunch of state. We have like promises effectively. We have updates. So things like sign up success, sign up failure. So it emits events. So if I did like test.com and I click subscribe and I go to submit, you saw the loading state, the success state. It emits the sign up success message. And this is kind of your updating, piece here. So you could see kind of the cool piece. And I can add things. So there's the inputs, the labels, there's a HTML.p. I realized I was originally using just straight HTML tags, but I kind of did the HTML dot thing so that it was could be used other places. You can have if statements, all in the spirit of Clojure. So I used a little bit of an inspiration from Clojure for some of this. But the general idea is this data structure can render UI on the fly. And I built a skills file with the idea that I could use an LLM to just build really rapid programs on the fly that can do different things, talk to different APIs, and I could actually throw them away if I would like. So the initial use case, as we were just saying, is programs I could just throw away. Like, oh, I need a UI to do this thing. Fill in a form, hit submit, throw it away. Like if I ever need it again, I could come back to it. The other piece is you could actually have web components and have an entire UI library. So that would not be, where I have HTML.p, I have a prefix here. It's like UI dot your component name. And you could actually load in like a design system and do these types of things on the fly. I think Lisp is a really cool format. It's not for everybody. My biggest reason for it is I think you could get to a place of token efficiency on larger UIs when you have the Lisp style, and you could actually add behavior to it. As you can see, I can actually add different pieces of behavior that is actually doing on the front end these things safely. Anyway, I don't know. It's like a silly little lab experiment that I always think about. I'll stop sharing now. It's one of those things, yeah.
Let's make it practical. Let's just like dumb it down and make it practical. I'm just here in support of you for today, but I like the demo, but I'm also trying to the purpose of the talk was fuck your UI, which followed up on a conversation which was the death of the UI. And this is really all not to like actually kill the user interface, but more to make it yours, more to make it personal, more to make it like adaptable to your needs, to your business, to how you evolve. What I am understanding about what you created is that there's a data source constant, which is the JSON package, which means that could be piped to any like an infinite number of user interface combinations of components. And that would be like any number of design systems. And so what I was thinking about, like when you were going through this is like, we spoke to a prospective customer yesterday that has the same business across 4 different domains. And each one of those domains could potentially be sharing a same data source, but piped to a totally different visual experience, even a generative interface or user experience where like that might be appropriate for one of the brands that they have. The customer comes, that they meet your user interface and they spin up the shopping experience that they want. In this case, it was an e-commerce brand. So am I thinking about this properly where I have like a data source constant? That's nothing new. That could be piped to an infinite series of design systems, so long as that design system has a field, keep it simple, has a field available for the data within the JSON file to return to.
Well, you're kind of you're kind of describing the traditional model, which is I have a data that comes out of Shopify that goes to a liquid template that follows a specific format. That's kind of the old way, which is you have the data and it merges with preset views, and I'd have 3, 4, 5 of them. This is really saying if I need to generate a program that's fully serializable and I want to do it on the fly, I want it to come straight out of the LLM and it's going to get parsed in the browser. Or if we built like server-side renderers, right, it could be parsed in Go and served up as an HTML template, and the actual script could like hydrate it, I suppose. It's a universal format that LLMs can use to output UI. It's really for UI on the fly. So what it came from is this idea that we wanted a unified data structure for our design system. I'm sort of saying this is for when things get really, it's almost more applicable today because now we're talking about completely non-deterministic UI. You're talking about fully deterministic. This is the data, this is the design system. I'm saying I'm going to let LLM just drive, except I don't really want to be creating an entire code base. What that allows us to do, one of the ways I see this being interesting is some kind of one of the use cases we see of Lovable, for example, is people are just designing in it, but they have no intention of using that. Same thing with V0. We've used V0 to like crank out designs, but we ultimately want to just bake it into a different stack, make different technology choices, but we end up using it as like a live prototyping. It's kind of the future of Figma. I sort of see this almost as that because those systems are building full code bases, which takes a ton of compute resources. I'm saying I have no intention of ever using this code base. So just build it in JSON Lisp, throw the whole UI together. It can do things like actions and it can appear to work because that's one of the things. In a lot of cases, I don't need a persistence layer either. I just need the thing to appear to work as a real app would. Now I could take that and translate it into my actual code base that I want to stack. So that was one use case that I had in my mind, which is how do we move away from Figma and but not go to Lovable because I don't really need the whole code base. We don't have any we don't really need Lovable making our technology choices for us. So I want a real working program that I could easily translate into. Maybe it's going to be a Rails code base. Maybe it's going to be a .NET code base, but it's going to be something with the long-term technology choices that I want for my organization. So maybe that's one use case for it. You're getting me into the future. And again, I don't know where this road leads. This road could lead nowhere. And I'm fully going to admit that this is a fully experimental journey for me. So if you're watching this and you're like this dude's on a road to nowhere, I may be going off the rails on a crazy train over here. I don't know. But there's a database, again, going back to the closure, something called Atomic. It's a database that's very different, operates very differently than most databases. But I thought about what if we applied this generally to data storage as well. The on-the-fly, right? On-the-fly UI, but on-the-fly data storage, where now I could actually save the things you're doing in the UI. Traditionally, we have to kind of save a schema unless we're using a NoSQL database. But even then, our code bases are typically kind of stopping us from like creating unique, weird pieces, weird data shapes and structures. But what if we could allow that and we could leverage LLMs to say, here's a bunch of data I saved in the past. I need you to display it for me that in such a way that I can see X, Y, and Z. And it can now say, great, I put together the UI that does that display for you. Once again, on the fly. I don't think if you're going to be requesting the same thing over and over again, that's different. That's like what software has always done.
Right.
This is sort of like, hey, I'm taking a bunch of jumbled kind of stuff and I want to be able to save it in a way that makes sense to me. And when I recall it, I want you to display it to me in a way that makes sense given the context. And that context may change at any given time for any given purpose.
So here's another question that I have, which is, we do a lot of, me especially, I do a lot of like, is this what you meant, Mr. Customer, with V0? And it's like, yeah, I love that. But to me, I personally wish when I was doing this that I could say, give me 5 options. One prompt 5 completely different options from a visual perspective. And we're
This I
selling.
think allows that. I think
That's
this
what
is
I'm
gonna be a
thinking for
faster
this.
way. So I think that I could make this very fast to happen, and I think it's another situation where we could almost build what I picture is like being able to share the URL with the customer and then being able to, because that's the other thing is you're driving and I'm picturing something where they could come in and it's a little bit more collaborative and a little bit more real. That's just kind of where my head's at with it. And again, my goal, my express goal, and I think this is kind of unique from the lovables and the replets, is this is not intended to be the final product. This is intended to be the prototype. And this
Right.
is intended to be, hey, let's get the
Iterate.
idea out of your head. But now I have a really interesting structure that my agent Codex can take and can say, okay, I see the common patterns. I see what they wanted to see. Now I can build the deterministic version of that UI. What does that turn into when we say, could you save these structures? Say, hey, that's actually a useful view. I want to save it so other people can use it. Man, again, I don't know where the road goes. It's just one of these things that I got like this itch that I'm scratching, and I'm just kind of running with it. It's fully now. Normally, something like this would have taken way too long. I guess this is an interesting use case too. Something like this would have taken way too much time for me to be working and then doing something like this on the side, not knowing where it goes.
Right.
I never felt like I had that kind of time in my life. And now, again, this is a 6-year-old. This project fully predates AI. I think I even used a version of this for an interview. I actually know it was the Netflix interview. So I had used a version of this for rendering a UI in kind of like a build your own front end framework. And I had this vision of like a Lisp that was also JSON, but was Elm. And I didn't know exactly what but it was, I don't know. I didn't, like I said, I felt like there was an application, and maybe it was the foreshadowing. Maybe the LLM is really the thing that makes this useful, because prior to that, it was kind of an oddity, a curiosity, just a, just a fun little, like, I don't know. I wonder if I could make a Lisp out of JSON, and then if I could make a UI language out of that. And now I'm like, that's actually kind of an efficient thing for an LLM to use. Look, going back to that remote view model, we had done it as like objects, where it was like component. We actually had the keys: component name, attributes, children. And then I was like, being more token efficient, I can do the Lisp thing where the first attribute is always the tag. The second object will be your inner your data attributes, and the third will be the children. But then you could also have programs like addition, subtraction, logical operators. I've added a couple of things. I could see it growing, and then we'll have to kind of consider that based on the things. But I think if you look at the standard data operations that most programs use and that most prototypes would use, I feel like you don't need a lot to get a pretty good bang for your buck. So the next step that maybe we'll see is, hey, I used this to build the thing. Was it silly, or did it do what I wanted it to do? But man, I had fun.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to like think about it in a practical way, from like how can a non-technical person kind of understand where this is going? Like for me, it feels very kind of reminiscent to like a Looker or Google Data Studio or like a Domo, Tableau, like one of these business intelligence tools. Just stick with me for a second.
Yeah, yeah.
For example, we built FIM forecasting to really have like eyes and ears on our business, but I am stuck with the views that you created for me. The views that were built from your brain. What I know is that the data that I need to see is in that program, is in the database. I know that the data that is there. I'm just not sure yet how I want to see it. That's the view. Like right now, I'm like stuck with what you built, which is fine.
Right.
I have gotten used to the UI you made for me, and I'm like, well, fuck, this is my life. But maybe what I want is to just have a conversation with the LLM and just say, give me 4 different ways to visualize this problem. And then I'll decide if any of them are good or none of them are good, blow away. We're going to try again, but I don't need to save anything just yet. And it's like very much like these business intelligence tools where it's like, that's the view I want to see. That's the thing I want to present to leadership. I want to save that down into something that just continues to persist and I can come back to it.
You're kind of describing what I pictured.
Okay.
I'll give you the fin forecasting, like the idea that I had that I think could be useful. Exactly as you said, I can't picture all the ways people want to serve their financial data. I mean, basically you had donut graph, you had bar graph, you had line, and then sometimes you're like, I don't know, like you just add a bunch of stuff and then you create these views and different visualizations, but you're always in the spirit of the talk with Donnie, I'm always building my UI for 51% or more.
Right.
Right? Basically, if as long as half the people want this thing, I'm building it for them. And that's kind of how we determine it by committee. It's whatever most people want. That's the UI we get. Or sometimes you do the Jira thing and you can drag in widgets. But even those widgets, it's basically this is the library of widgets and this is what you get. What I could picture is, because we do have an MCP that can fetch the data. And so now the agent that I built, instead of serving you back chat, it would say, go and fetch this data. Now I want you to serve up render the JSON Lisp. It can just render it in the right-hand panel of like, hey, you want to see a donut graph of that data? Here's the data. I've output the program, and I'm telling the LLM, don't communicate back to me in a chat. Communicate back to me in UI. I want you to return this JSON Lisp spec that I built. So it's got to be pretty compact. So this is one of the reasons I'm very concerned with the token consumption is we want to stay compact. And we now have a JavaScript renderer that can do this for a web interface. And so that could be really cool. But then I thought about it. I go, why not a terminal UI? Like, I like terminal UIs. Like, why not build the bash version of where JSON Lisp feeds it into a bash function and it turns it into terminal UI in real time? And then if you do like something, maybe the interface has like a snapshot. But all I have to do is save the JSON Lisp to the database then. Now, it is kind of merged with your data. So there is this concept of like the state. So it could say save the view, but every time I request this data, you'll have to do a little work in the LLM tooling or in your MCP to say, don't render this on the fly this time because I want to keep this as a standard view. That kind of comes into how you build your application. But I do think you're right. For these kind of odd things that you're not sure what you want to see, it's very, very compelling in my mind to do it that way. So for things that people request over and over again, that's traditional computing.
Solved. Right.
But for you may say like once a year, you're like, hey, I need to take a look at this in this way, or I'm applying for a loan and they're asking for this. And you on the fly build the UI into the tooling. So, like what if somebody came in and was just like, I don't want to see this as a Kanban. I want to see this as like the old pivotal. And like it can literally take your data and transform and build UI around.
Right.
Right. Like we know the stories, we know the state that they're in, but the visualization of that is changing. That's kind of where I was at with this is how do we get to the fuck your UI point? How do we get to that place where we can render different UIs for different people based on their personal preferences? The saving of that UI, I think, is going to be some combination of just saving that JSON instead of needing to, right? Because what you don't want, or what I can't allow, is for you to actually, like, our tool is built in Rails. I can't have you writing ERB files to the server. I can't have users writing files to the server, but they most certainly can write JSON to a database. And they're
I also can't stop but think that this is maybe like the future of accessibility is like, I don't know why you're here. And if my site accommodates you, tell me what you require from this experience. And we're going to render you the proper experience. The data is, again, constant. You're here for the data. You're not really here for the way I make you view it.
Well, this is all right. So now you're talking about a really interesting thing. Okay, now hear this out. What if you could take the view that was default standard rendering? Because we have that. I did this for Best, and I created other views, which is hiding icons or turning the page black and white, or like different combinations for different accessibility concerns. Right? There was a bunch of them. But what if it was like I didn't preload an accessibility concern? Now I could say, here's the ERB template. Here's all the things that it does. LLM, return me the JSON Lisp of a modified view of that, because it was a view I didn't think of.
Couldn't predict.
But I have one user requesting it and I want to give it to them. Yeah. Now this all assume I do hope that LLM costs get cheaper because that really makes it very possible now where what we go back to this idea of what's the weakest LLM you can use to get the same result. What is the weakest LLM we could use to get the same? Now you really could have kind of a set of UI components that are pre-built, because I do support these pre-built components. that'll be served, but then, hey, I need to modify this in some way. Like this doesn't look right. This isn't exactly right. So people watching, if your imagination becomes you, I'm kind of curious. That's why I open sourced it. I'm just like, let people do
See where it
things.
goes.
So if people should do things with it, I'm going to mess around with it. I think that I just kind of am thinking of the future of the non-deterministic UI. That's what I think I kind of would call this non-deterministic UI. It's the building block of it. I think it takes on that remote view model and it takes it to another level. I think Lisp is the right format for this. And there you have it.
I mean, well, first of all, like, thanks for making it digestible. I personally appreciate
Did I
that.
succeed?
I
Was it
followed
pretty
you. I followed you the entire way. Like, I don't necessarily need to understand the full jargon, but I sure as heck know how
cool?
this works now and what you anticipate. And what I'm trying to do, and anybody that's not an engineers are going to go in a different direction with this. What I'm trying to do from just a consumer's perspective, a web surfer's perspective, is how does this accommodate the average person? How does this just accommodate me and my uniqueness? Maybe the future is like, I have a style in which I would like to see all websites, all applications. Like, I just want my vibe to be your data in my way. I just see this as like why are you here? Tell me a little bit about your personality, or here's my cousin Justin style guide. I want to see your data my way. I don't know, but I think like the future is, how does the web accommodate me versus we have all tried to figure out how to build the thing that accommodates the mass. And this is more about, like, again, 51% of your A/B test is where the decision was made. Is that actually, like, what about the other 50%? They don't fucking matter. The other 49%
It's like a tyranny of the
don't matter.
majority for UI
Yeah,
at all
yeah.
times, right? And
But
if you want to see
eliminate
it
the vote
different,
altogether. Yeah, like, see it your way. Have it your way. I don't know what fast food restaurant said that, but have it your way.
have it your way.
Kind of makes sense to me. Now, here's the question is, like, what is the future of the persistent piece of the user interface that I would interact with coming to somebody's app or website that gets me started?
So,
is it like a tiny little chatbot on a blank white page? Like, what is the smallest little piece that
you
it
want to be
needs
able
to
to
be there?
save things. So, I mean, I've thought about this idea. So a couple of things. One is web browsers fully support, they have like database type structures inside of them that we could kind of leverage for simple things. There's the idea of even using like the hookup to a file on your machine, but then you can't sync across machines, right? So that gets a little weird. This is all right. So this is really getting kind of into it.
I mean, I'll tell you this, dude. My iPhone knows everything there ever was to know about cousin Justin.
Well, yeah, because it's tracking you at all times.
Right. But what happens if I got to a website and it already knows me and it already serves me what the hell, like, I'm my style is, my interests are, what I'm looking for, why I'm here. It knows we're having this conversation. It knows that I'm presenting to the board in like a couple of days. The phone knows everything going on in your damn life.
Well, this is kind of cool. Tim Berners-Lee had a project. Well, no, Tim Berners-Lee had a little project. I forget what it was called, but it was the idea that you own your data and you bring it into every website. And so I've already been here a little bit. My first thought was the simplest MVP version is I'm going to store everything locally on the browser. It won't sync across devices, but you'll be in your browser and basically, like, we could have something where it's storing data about you, but it's all self-contained. He had this idea of almost these, like, it sounded like it was these storage containers of sorts in the cloud that would, like, you would log into it. Very Web3, like Web3 kind of had this a little bit where it was like, hey, your data universally accessible, but owned by you. So instead of Google taking my data, it's basically my data kind of can be merged. I would own it. And that's an interesting proposition. I thought about that, which is you do like cloud storage that has this idea of dealing with messiness in data. So now I'm trying to think, and I'll give you the spoiler alert. I look at Datomic in some ways, even though there is a little bit of a concept of schema. It's built on top of Dynamo or Cassandra. I have this idea of how do we store messiness in data, because you may just come in with some weird way you want to store your name or something like that. And LLMs allow us to deal with mess, which is it's just a super interesting thing that we've never been able to do before in this way. And so this goes into where I think computing could expand. So many people are like, computing is dead. I go, no, I think that the way we did it is now done very easily by LLMs. But how do we deal with the idea of a messy data set? And so maybe you have this locker of personal data, and then you go to fill out or do different things. And maybe you're rendering UI that's interacting with MCP servers of other services. So when I want to book a hotel, I'm getting hotel deals from Expedia, from Kayak, from Hotwire, but it's coming through in one singular interface. I don't have to check 4 or 5 different sites. Now, does that behoove these sites to allow that to happen? I don't know. But I know that instead of having the friction of having to check different places, I could then see it in like a booking style, which is, this is how I like to book my trips, and it's building the UI for me, but it's using the data that's stored about me, but that's not stored with those companies. That's stored locally with me, or it's stored in a cloud server that I own, a piece of database that I own. That's very, and then that gets into the security model of like, how do we let agents purchase on our behalf safely, securely? Yeah, this is all, I'm on a side quest. What can I tell you?
That's fine. We'll find our way. It could take another 6 years, but we'll find our way. Dude, thanks for an interesting concept and an interesting idea, and yet another open source project that we'll add to the repertoire.
Up to
Repertoire. See you, dude.
Peace.